on to the second installment of our second systematic review challenge. I'm tremendously excited to be here with you today because this is going to be a really exciting session. I know all of you have been working hard and have come prepared, ready to go. Several of you have caught up on last week's replay. And as we dive in, I'm going to make sure you're up to speed because this material is going to snowball. So that is to say, if you haven't completed the first step, haven't completed the first session, you're going to feel lost in this session. So it's good to watch, but you do want to make sure you catch up on the replay. I'm just going to check that the stream is working properly, and it looks like it is. That is fantastic. Really just great to welcome our new members. I know many of you are really stepping in with us for the Systematic Review Challenge. I just want to remind you, the last time we ran this, again, timed over an 8-week block, many people thought it wasn't possible, that they could start from never having done a research project before to publishing in 2 months. And I can assure you 100% it is. See the testimonials in the group, people who realized the impossible. And that's what we try to do in this group. My name's David Stuckler. I am a professor at the University of Baconium Law, and I share in this group the insider secrets, the secrets that I've taught my students at Harvard, Oxford, and Cambridge. Now I'm opening them up. I really believe in open access, democratizing them to make them available for you. This group, you'll find, is 100% free. You'll find valuable training if you go straight to the guide section in my Facebook group. Just going to ping a reminder here. Do join our Facebook group if you haven't already. That way we can directly communicate and we can really begin to tap the power of community. And one of the reasons I set up this group, I really launched it during coronavirus when a lot of my grad students were struggling, feeling isolated, and I wanted to set it up because I too had a lot of challenges as a grad. I created this group to create the kind of support to help you avoid the most common pitfalls that I see grads struggle with, because I personally went through those, whether that's from getting stuck when you're writing, going in circles, having supervisors who don't respond, feeling like your back's against the wall for a deadline and you're panicking. And it came to such an extreme point that I was on the verge of flunking out, and I even dropped out one session to prevent my grades from really suffering. So I want you to make those mistakes that I did, and I want you to take full advantage of the resources and the power of the community that we have here at Fast Track available to you. So with that, I'm going to dive into the session. This session is going to be about defining your keywords. And this is not necessarily a simple task. There are some steps to take to get these keywords right. And if you don't have them right, you run the risk of repeating steps going forward and backwards. And it's one of the most frustrating things that you can experience as a student, to feel like you take one step forward, 2 steps back. So I want to make sure we build a really strong foundation before going forward. So just a quick checklist recap from our last session. For defining your topic, you need to have a good topic. And the way you can test that topic is good is by using our PICO model. Remember, which is our population, intervention, comparison, and outcome, sometimes with a T tacked onto it for the time of your study, the time horizon that you're going to look at. And you need to also make sure that there's enough research on your topic. Sometimes I see students are doing something brand new, and there's just no research to summarize yet. You may need to step back and cast a little bit of a wider net and make sure you can get about, there's no hard and fast rule, but I like to see that there's some maturity in the field that you're already looking at and trying to synthesize. And so that means you want to have about, at least your initial scan, about 30 articles that are published on the topic that's relevant. One of the things I can especially troubleshoot, having chatted with many of you about your topics over the past week, is to get real clarity on your outcome. And if you don't have clarity on your outcome, you're going to be a little bit lost at sea. And remember, when I talk about outcome, I'm talking about often that in social science, natural sciences, you're looking at the relationship of an X and a Y, of an independent variable and a dependent variable. Something is related to something in very, very simple terms. We're going to be going through some examples today to make this really concrete and help you to define keywords. I also wanted you to be ready for the session to be able to make a sentence out of your PICO. And so I was speaking with Scott, who's here, and we were talking about, in his topic, the impact of digital health consultations on preventive care access. And so that's a really nice topic that you can kind of boil down your topic to a very simple sentence. And I mean simple, but I don't mean dumbing down. It's like Da Vinci said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And you will find people who are more experts in their field, they actually can articulate things in very simple terms. And I tend to find people who are novices and just beginning, they're often using fancy jargon and things that actually get kind of muddled and confused and don't make a lot of sense. So I want you for yourself to keep things as simple and clear as you can. The research is already complex enough. So let me talk then. So if you've done all these steps, if you haven't gone these steps, you're not going to get the same value out of this session. So you do need to go watch the other one. I also want those of you, many of you are watching on the replay. We are really a truly international community with people in Australia, Jamaica, the UK, Sub-Saharan Africa, across the world participating in these sessions. I really love it. It's fantastic. And I want to make sure that you guys are getting the right value out of this. So make sure you're there. I love to see the enthusiasm for all of you. We are going to cover, I'm just tapping some questions using the Boolean search method. We are going to start building up some pilot searches. So today, what I'm going to teach you, you are going to learn how to identify the keywords in your topic. You're going to learn our nearest neighbor match method for identifying those keywords. Then we're going to go straight into two leading databases to help you start your searches. And for the vast majority of you, those are going to include Web of Science. And we have a lot of health people in the group as well. So I'm also going to cover PubMed. And I'm going to show you how to build up your search, pilot it. And finally, I'm going to teach you about the two most common errors in your search. And I'm going to teach you a framework for thinking about search errors using type 1, type 2 errors. So you're going to walk away from the session with a lot of knowledge. You may want to take notes just to make sure you've really ingrained and are solid on what we're showing here. And then, of course, you can always catch up on the replay that's going to be posted in the group. So let me dive straight in. I want to come with a very practical example. And I'm going to share my screen. I'm on my travel laptop, so sometimes this gets a little glitchy. So please let me know in the chat if that happens. And I'm going to come straight here. And you should be able to see a whiteboard. If you can't see a whiteboard, somebody let me know in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to start here by typing a topic and help you to identify the keywords from it. So like I said, this is the importance of being able to make a sentence because we want to focus in our sentence on differentiating the nouns and the verbs. And our keywords are really going to be the nouns. I see a lot of people trying to use search, put in the verbs, and that's not really going to get you what you want. So let me do an example that I like from somebody in the group. So impact of poverty on HIV treatment outcomes. So, and you can already see in our PICO model here what we have. So what you have here is impact. I want to highlight impact is not a keyword. That is really what's linking, right? If you think about this as a model, right, we want to see how poverty is going to affect treatment outcomes in this in people with HIV. In people with HIV. Okay, so I encourage you strongly. I was speaking with a student from Australia, and she was really going in circles. She was really confused, but she couldn't create a very simple causal logic and diagram to what she was trying to look at. And so this is what I talked about before. When you have this X, and this is in your PICO, is going to be your intervention or your exposure to link with some outcome of interest. In this case, it's just we're using treatment outcomes, and your outcome, depending on your field, may need to be very pinpoint, well defined, or you may even be able to go broader, depending again on how much there is in your field. And I'll talk about piloting to get that balance just right. Okay, so I'm going to erase this and come back. I do want you to be able to make this causal diagram of your topic because it's going to help you with the keywords. And you can already see the PICO in this. Right, our intervention is here, is poverty. Our population is going to be people with HIV, right? Our outcome is going to be treatment outcomes. And our comparison, just kind of conceptually, not all of you will have a clear comparison, but it's always important when you're doing research, you know what your comparison group is. even if it's not well defined, but this is going to be poverty. Your comparison here hypothetically might be to better off people, higher socioeconomic status, for example. So you can already see here that our three key words are going to be poverty, uh, just falling straight from our PICO, treatment outcomes, and HIV. And at the end, we're going to have some time for some question and answer, and we'll be able to operationalize this for your keywords. But these are the keywords that we're going to need to search for and really focus on and make sure we get. And so the way we're going to do this is we're going to start building up the components of our search based on operationalizing each of these keywords in a clear way. And you don't really want to go too far until you've really defined everything. That's what I'm saying. We're really going to build things up step by step to save you headache, frustration, and lost time. By the way, do pop questions into the chat if anything is not clear to you. That's really helpful because if it's not clear to you, it's probably not clear to somebody else. So don't feel any sense of imposter syndrome, like, oh, you're gonna find out I'm really not good. This is, look, I'm a professor in your corner, not in your class. This is a safe space to ask even what seems like the dumbest of questions. And because again, odds are other people are not going to be able to follow if you can't. So I just want to build up. I'm going to use this as an example to build up. Right? This just to say, all right, this could be instead of this treatment outcomes generally, this could be anything else. Could be HIV mortality, for example, or could be on HIV spread or incidence. You could swap this out, or it could be diabetes. If you wanted to look at diabetic patients, you could change this around in many ways. You could say instead of looking at poverty, you could look at antiretrovirals or another kind of intervention. And this is really quite flexible. Or maybe we could switch out and say, look at climate change. I don't know why climate change and HIV treatment outcomes would be linked, but it's just a hypothetical example. This framework is quite flexible, will fit with any field you're looking at. We've got people in the group who are looking at the impact of poverty on populist voting. So it works in political science. It works in musicology, lots of different fields. Again, this is your way of summarizing a vast body of knowledge to help you answer a specific and practical question in your field and really set a good foundation that you're right at the forefront of what you're studying. So we've got our keywords here, and I hope you can all see you really want to identify these nouns. So words here that you'll often find like impact, sometimes you might say determinants, sometimes people have in their title, I'm just giving you some kind of common words, or relationship, right? These kinds of things, these are not words they're not keywords. They're not really specific to your topic. You don't need those in your search. They're not a keyword. Your keywords are these main unique nouns that link to your PICO. Okay, let me show you now. So to get these key terms, so what a lot of students I see do is a recipe for trouble at this point. What they tend to do is take, okay, I got poverty, and they go straight into the search engine and say, okay, I'm going to start searching for poverty. Or what I often see them do is, okay, this is my sentence, and they just pop this sentence straight into the search engine. Now that can work for something like Google Scholar, which is well optimized as a search algorithm to feed you results that are relevant to you. But it's not very good for searching an inventory database, which is much more comprehensive than Google Scholar and is fully replicable, but is not going to really respond well because it doesn't have that search algorithm like Google has. We need to build up our search step by step, and we need to make sure that we fully capture the concept. You don't want to end up making a mistake that I see some students make. Say, they did their search, they wrote up their paper, everything good. They send to a journal, and they come back and say, well, actually, you searched for poverty, but you really didn't capture poverty because you missed the term deprivation. Or another reviewer comes along and says, well, you didn't capture impoverishment, or you didn't capture indigence, or other terms for poverty. And so it's well and good for you to try to think of, well, what are the different words for poverty? But when people talk about poverty, they often use different words to invoke it. And so you need to make sure you've captured the way different people writing in different cultures, different journals, different disciplines talk about poverty to make sure that when you search for these papers on poverty, that you've captured them. And to make sure you've done that, I recommend our nearest neighbor match method. I want to keep track here. So to do this, I'm going to open up a Word document right here. And I already, when I write linearly. So what we're doing now is we're already starting the methods of our paper. And so I create a Word document with a working draft of the methods. And so I know, and I'll already begin to title this method. So I actually write the paper as I go along, and you'll see as we come into writing up that I write the paper from the inside out because this is the most natural way to proceed. We'll write from the methods section going forward, not what so many students do, which is just try to go linearly. And now my keywords, my three keywords that I have here, I have poverty, and I have HIV, and I have treatment outcomes. And I'm going to need to search using my nearest neighbor match for all three. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up with some of the most common terms for poverty. Now, how am I going to do that? I could go and just kind of make up and say, okay, I think social deprivation, I think a lot of other things. We're going to be more systematic, and we're actually going to take what did other people do in their systematic reviews? How did they define poverty? And if we take one or two systematic reviews or other papers that look at poverty, maybe on a different topic than ours, then we can feel pretty confident that we've really captured and defined poverty well in our search, and we've begun to operationalize it well. And that's really helpful when you go submit your paper for peer review, because then if they say, oh, well, Scott, you didn't really capture poverty very well, you can say, well, look, if you have a problem with my paper, you're going to have a problem with 1, 2, 3 papers that have been published peer reviewed, and that was robust and considered adequate for publication using their approach to operationalizing poverty. So we're going to make sure that you get this right. And so let me open up Google Scholar and show you how we're going to do this directly. And I'm excited to share this with you because, again, this is the kind of thing that you're just not going to, I've never seen a book really teach this anywhere apart from our training. And, it's really helped my students avoid problems. One of our top students, Mohammed, published a paper on migration, and the reviewers were concerned. Well, in the UK, we talk about migration differently from the US, and I'm worried you haven't captured it. And Mohammed could come back and say, well, look, my key terms actually, I've operationalized it with all the different ways that is talked about in these two different countries. And the reviewer was quite happy with that because we had anticipated that problem. So what I suggest you do here, you've already done the nearest neighbor search to make sure your systematic review hasn't been done before, so that's good. Now we're looking at systematic review specifically for your key terms. So any systematic review on poverty is going to do. And here's a nice one. Let me make sure that I can access it. But any of these will work as a starting point. Let me see if I can get a couple here. Here's a systematic review WHO. Let me look at a couple. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go straight through. I'm going to have a laser light focus. I'm not even going to read this paper. I'm just going to go straight and look at their methods. And I'm also going to see what databases they searched. So let's see. This looks like it's a WHO document, so it's not published in a journal. Might be a little slow to load. So while that's loading, I'm going to go look at the other document. I would rather stick with published literature. This is 414 pages. So we're going to skip that, but for now, because it's going to take too long to get through. Let's look here. Okay, good. This is an open access one, which is nice. And look, here we go. You can see they went through all of this effort to capture poverty. And so those for capturing poverty-related studies, you can see me highlighting right here. Let me zoom in so you can see it a little better. Whoa, that just threw me off. There you go. So they already put time, energy, and thought into thinking about, well, how do we capture poverty in the literature? And so we're just going to rip and really strip out what they've done. Now, you're not plagiarizing at all. You're just, that cliche, standing on the shoulders of giants. These guys are already published in a great journal using this approach. We're just going to build layers. Now, let's make sure you copy the article, because we're going to cite, when we cite our keywords, we're going to cite this article. Say, well, following the approach of these guys, we're going to operationalize poverty like this. You may not agree with everything they have in here, but it's a starting point. So they took socioeconomic, they took a very broad conception of poverty. You may have in your field, there are different definitions of certain terms you're using. You want to be able to defend how you set up and why you set up. I know this is technical and detailed, but you need this level of detail and rigor in your approach to be robust. So this is good. I don't know if I would include housing here. I don't think I'd include health expenditures, but it's very clear these guys are using a multi-dimensional view of poverty, and that's okay. So what I would do is I would take this, and maybe I would take a couple more papers. Let's go find one more. Here's one from PLOS One. Let's look here. And when I have more time, I would go back and look at the WHO one as well, just to make sure I left no stone unturned. And you'll get diminishing returns. You'll hit saturation at some point, not need to go more. And you'll see these are usually pretty good. Sometimes comprehensive search terms, here, you straight here, go straight to the appendix. Note, I'm not going to read this paper start to finish. I'm going to see sometimes these appendices are a little bit tricky to access, but looks like here a sample search string. Let's see if we got it. Should be here. There it is. Okay, great. We can get their search string. Let's see what they've got. And I've intentionally set this up to do this live with you. I haven't done this in advance, so we're looking at this for the first time. So you can just see how efficient you can be at going through this. Wow, so they've got a massive search. And at the end of the day, you're going to have your search string is going to be like this. You're going to make it replicable so anybody can copy and paste what you did and get the same number of papers, same results. Okay, here we go. Poverty, income, earnings. I'm just going to copy this in. These things we're going to talk about later. This TIAB, that's signaling search the title and the abstract here. And we'll go clarify which databases they search. That's something I forgot to take from the other. You can see they've got this, and you can see what they've done here is what we're going to do. They've built up each keyword slowly. So this is nice. We're going to put this in, and we're going to remember to cite the paper. And you can see there's overlap. They have income. They have income. They have social class. But they also have social rank. And this is why it's nice to do this, because you're going to get different things. They didn't have socioeconomic status, they do. And you can already see by taking this nearest neighbor match approach, these different papers, we're going to get a really comprehensive, nice search term for poverty that I think is going to be better than either of the two papers that we're looking at. So let me come back here and we're going to copy this so we don't forget it by Banks and colleagues. I sometimes drop that in. I just want to see what databases. You can see the databases they searched. I want you guys to search at least 2 databases. You'll start to see diminishing returns. That most of what you'll fish out, these databases often have a very high degree of overlap. After you get past your first 2 databases, you get very incremental gains. Just good for you to keep track of what databases there were as well. So here's that citation, and now we've got our poverty. We need to do the same thing for HIV and for treatment outcomes. I'm not going to go through all that now because I want to get to the next step with you of actually going through and searching. But before I do that, I want to take a moment and see if we have any questions. And also because I'm going to go through some live examples later on your topic with the time we have remaining at the end of the session. I want you to pop your PICO or your linking sentence, bringing your PICO together into the chat so that we can look at it together and you apply our nearest neighbor match to your search terms. So do drop that in the chat so we can get going. And let me see. I'm just going to stop the screen share for a second and so we've got a question here that I want to take. Do we need to spell out the outcome in the titles? At times there are multiple outcomes. So your outcome will almost always be in the title of your paper. I mean, systematic reviews are systematized, and that goes right through to the title. So the title will usually include the elements of your PICO in it. That's why it's so important to get that right. If there are multiple outcomes, that's okay. You want to cluster that under a heading. One systematic review I did when I was in the prehistoric period, when I was in your shoes, is I tried to compare the performance of public and private health systems. And so my outcome was health system performance. And I looked at access, utilization, equity, responsiveness, a range of different parameters. And that's okay. But because my outcome, I then summarize the literature into many different buckets of outcomes. Sometimes people, when they might look at an outcome like well-being, they might then disaggregate it into physical and mental health well-being, and that's okay. Just as long as you have real clarity on the outcome that you're looking at and you know you've got those 30 plus 30 plus papers. Right. And Daniel is just a quick question. Daniel Milton, pop those in the main chat. Those of you in the studio, that's on the right side of the screen, or drop that in the Facebook chat. We've got another question here I just want to take before we go on. I want to make sure everybody's with me. In what situation do we limit search to a particular number of years? Is there any minimum number of years? Well, for example, turning back to Scott, who's interested in digital health consultations, right? You would limit to a number of years for a conceptual reason, simply because back in the 1970s, we weren't having digital health consultations. So there's no real point in looking back then. Other people, there might be a technological development in your field so that the conversation you're having, the question you're asking is only relevant in a certain time frame. Another reason you might do that could be a pragmatic one, and that will come to our inclusion exclusion criteria as a way to limit the number of studies. Although I prefer coming up with other criteria for limiting the number of studies, although that is one reason you might limit the time frame, is you just have thousands of articles and you only want to summarize the most recent ones. In general, I want you to have an intellectual, like a theoretical or conceptual reason for why you're restricting the time frame, such as that example of, well, I only want to focus on this generation of technology, which started, say, in the year 1995, or that was the advent of digital health consultations, so that's my starting point, if that makes sense. Really good question, though. Let me come back. So I want to come and I want to start operationalizing search and show you how to do things in PubMed and in Web of Science. And especially with PubMed, there are some special ways, Web of Science as well, but there are special ways that these databases have already organized the literature into buckets for you. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. But let me first get us started with our initial search here and go straight into, we're going to go into PubMed. And note that we've got in the background here a working document of how we're beginning to operationalize things. I'm not going to do the full neighbor method on all of these because just time, but I want you to understand the principle. You're going to go, right? You guys are not novices. You are part of the Fast Track community, and you know you need to go straight to advanced. Kind of this hidden down here. That's where you need to go, straight to advanced. Because if you just do impact of poverty on HIV treatment outcomes, you can already see the problem. It's very hard to put in all patients of poverty just into this bar. And if you do this, you're just going to get a really messy search. There's 100 results. Oh, hang on, I've got a filter still left. You get 100, and you're not. You have a lot of trouble troubleshooting, diagnosing, and building up. You need to go straight into advanced. You need to do one at a time. So let me just delete this off. So we're starting from a clean slate, and we're going to build up each keyword at a time. Now, in this advanced search builder, you can see you have options. You can search all fields or narrow that down. If you search all fields, it's anywhere in the text. If your term's up, that's indexed in PubMed, it's going to show up as a hit. And I personally have had really good success using just title and abstract. And that was that acronym you saw earlier, that TIAB is title and abstract. So I like searching title and abstract because that's going to be kind of more on target, more on the money for what I really want to look at. You don't have to, and in some cases you may not, but this is a good starting point. And so we're going to take our term for poverty straight that we've adapted from our nearest neighbor match, and I'm going to kind of put these two together in different ways. So I'm going to synthesize these and take the key terms. So let me just integrate them here because this one nicely has socioeconomic status. So let's put this in here. And I'm going to get rid of I'm going to leave these quotes in for now. This is going to take a second to do. So I like socioeconomic status. I also like sometimes acronyms get into the title. They also have social class, and you see this star here. So that means that anything after class, social classes, or something those will also be picked up. That's okay. I don't think there's a lot of permutations there. And wage, salary, I'm not so crazy about these. I don't like that these don't have deprivation, so I might add some terms that I just personally know are relevant. So I would do this with deprived star here in this case. because that's going to capture deprivation, deprived, lots of different words to that extent. Social rank is okay. We can put social rank. So let's get all these in, and let's get this out. And the other thing you need to know is now to think about Boolean logic. So I'm not going to go through and fully teach you Boolean logic. The point is we want the paper to be included if it has any one of these words. So that means if there's social class, or if there's socioeconomic status, or if there's anything on deprivation, or if there's anything on SES. And so this or is really important to put in here. So I'm just going to put or. I'm going to get rid of all these commas and put or, and or. And again, there's a faster way to do this if I just find and replace all the commas, but we're going to take a second and do all this together. Again, this is exactly the kind of step you guys are going to follow on your own. I don't know if I really like housing or health expenditure because that's not the way I'm really thinking of poverty here. So that's okay. I think socioeconomic factors is kind of broad, so I'm also going to kick that out. As long as you justify why you've made those choices, again, this is just for illustrative purposes. So now I've got my first setting here. So there we go. I'm going to pop that in. And what I'm going to do is you're going to click add, and then I'm going to add to history. And you can see here, and this is really helpful, right, that I can see 937,639 results. I'm building this up step by step. This gives me the ability to diagnose, right, with each component of my search, am I building this up in the right way, or is something going wrong? And so I can, if I think I'm getting too many hits that are not relevant, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, this gives me the data to diagnose and troubleshoot that step. Say, oh, well, this keyword's not actually getting enough articles. Oh, this keyword is too far off and getting too much stuff that's not relevant. I'm going to add HIV or AIDS here and add that to the history. And you can see HIV/AIDS has 415,000. And finally, I'm just going to add treatment outcomes, but we're going to do something different on this in a minute. When I have two terms like this, right, if you want to make sure two words, you put a quote around it. So we'll add this to the history. And you can see our initial search. We have our three components of our search. And this gives me the data on each component, see how things are going. And I can now build up my search together. I can go add this query. I'm going to add the next one with and add the other one with and. Don't worry, I just went through that very quickly. We're going to come back and show that. And now you can see this gives me a nice 330 results in my search to look at. And if I want to look at this search, I can come right here, and here we got it. And now even an eyeball test tells me, look, social determinants, including HIV. We'll go through and look at this in a second. What I can see, though, is this isn't really capturing treatment outcomes very nicely. So this is what I wanted to share with you about PubMed. That has a really nice feature. PubMed has organized already literature into something called medical area subject headings. And these are called mesh terms in PubMed. Let me show you what I mean. Here we go. These medical subject headings. And for all of your topics, but it will work for some. And so, for example, if you wanted to search for COVID, there's a mesh term for COVID here, COVID-19. That already, by using this term, it's going to include all these different subheadings together. It's somebody has already done the hard work and optimized and put all these search terms together so that when you put in the COVID-19 specifier you're looking at the mesh term, it's going to include all of these things for you. So that saves you a lot of time. You don't have to include all these different terms in your search. The different ways people talk about coronavirus, somebody's already done it. So for some very common things people search for, it's already there. And that's definitely going to be the case here. So if I search for treatment outcome, for example, I can see there is a mesh term for it right here, treatment outcome. And this is any evaluation undertaken and so forth. And what I can do is I can just come straight from here, add it to my search builder. I'm going to put it here so it goes into my advanced builder. And so now when I come back to my advanced search, you can see I have treatment here. And you can see treatment outcome is capturing a whole lot more than just putting the treatment outcome in the title and abstract. Because this is really already kind of optimized by PubMed for you. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. And you'll see this is commonly what we're doing. If somebody's already operationalized it using your nearest neighbor match, or there's already a subject heading area for that term, just use that. Um, and people are going to have a tough time arguing with that because that's kind of the standard that the field uses. So I'm going to redo my search and use it instead with mesh term. And again, this is why you want to use this advanced builder, because you can build up step by step. You can retrace your steps very easily. So I'm going to add this query here. Well, let me just make sure I've cleared everything off. So we're going to add the poverty term. We're going to add HIV and AIDS with and this time, because it has to be, we have to have a term in poverty, we have to have a term on HIV AIDS, and we have to have a term on treatment outcomes for it to fit with our PICO and our model. So add this to history, and you see this is getting more, but that's okay. That's okay. It's a more targeted search. And let's take a look here and see what we're getting. Okay. So this 912 results would be the basis for what I would then go through and do in the next stages. I want to go through this together with you, but before I do, I want to do an exam inside Web of Science, because many of you will be using Web of Science as well. I want to cover those two databases. And then I'm talking about the two kinds of errors now as you work with and you pilot your searches, you try to optimize. I want to talk about type 1, type 2 errors and how you're going to get those into alignment before you go on to the next step of screening and applying eligibility stages in your criteria. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. I want to go over to Web of Science, and I also want to come back to the chat and see if anybody has any major questions that I can cover for you here. Please do pop those in. Let me go over to Web of Science and show you guys how to operationalize that there. To get access, I've got to go through my library. Many of you will probably have to go through your university library, and you may need to link up which library in to figure out how to do that and make sure you've got access. But this is kind of the protocol for me to do it, to go through the library that I have access to at University of Bocconi and get through that. And here we go. Here's Web of Science. Oops, just clicked on the wrong thing. Hang on a second. Let me come back. I want to go search databases, Web of Science, and go through that portal. Here we go. This is the portal. This is going to be different for each of you, but you just need to make sure you've got access to one of these major search engines. I'm going to go ahead and log in here and show you again how to set up a search and how we do it in Web of Science. This is going to take a second to load while we're screen sharing. I'm just going to check the chat if any of you have any major questions. I hope this is all clear for you so far. I mean, normally you would have several sessions in a university course to get to this point, but this is just optimized. This is just very practical. We're getting straight to the point. We're not teaching you broad theory or other things you don't need. We're going to show you how to do it. And I think the best way to learn is by doing. Rolling up your sleeves, getting on, doing it, troubleshooting it. You're at the stage in research where, yeah, right, learning from a textbook is just not as efficient. So you can see here we're at Web of Science. You want to do the same thing, right? You guys are on the fast track. You are going straight to advanced search. And here we go. It's a similar kind of format. That's why once if you know how to do it in PubMed, Web of Science, you know how to do it in them all, because they all have this kind of functionality. See, Web of Science also has some buckets. It organizes things in research area, Web of Science categories. There are different things you can filter by. You can actually get a lot of value out of this. For example, we did a search. We wanted to see if people who are getting European grants actually published on those. So we searched for papers funded by a certain funding agency or by grant numbers. There's lots of interesting things you can do here on the side of analyzing citations, what different organizations are doing, analyzing conflicts of interest. It's more advanced. I want you to master the basics, but I just want to kind of alert you to that functionality being there. Personally, I like Web of Science doing a topic search. What you can see on this topic search, I know it's going to be a little small, is you see it says searches, title, abstract, author keywords, and keyword plus. This is nice too. This is the equivalent of searching kind of the title and the abstract, but doing it in Web of Science. So I'm going to come here. And again, I'm going to take track of what I've got here, my terms, and I'm going to put them in the same way I just did, one by one. So topic, I'm going to copy and paste. I'm going to add to the query. And again, I'm not going to search. I'm going to add to the history. So here we go. This is getting more coming up here, and that's okay. And now I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to do the same thing. Come back to topic. I'm going to do HIV or AIDS. Add this. Add to the history. Now this time I don't have the same kind of mesh term. So I am going to have to use just treatment outcomes in quotes. So, and I might put a star here. And whoops, I get the quote. So add it to the query and add to history. All right, here we go. So there we can see, I get nuts and bolts, and you can see we're getting quite different numbers looking across the different searches. Now what I'm going to do is very simply combine these sets. Combine sets with and. Here we go. And this time I got PubMed, we got 912, and I got 609. And at this point here, impact of socioeconomic inequality on outcomes of answer. This one looks right on the money for the topic. And I'm going to explain to now how to go through that. Guys, any questions? I know I went through this a little, but the key steps I want to recap for you. Go straight to the advanced builder. Make sure you build up each keyword one at a time. Don't lump them all together. That's going to help you troubleshoot and diagnose each keyword is working well. And if you need to make changes to that keyword, you can do so and then build back up your search. After you operationalize each keyword, then you combine them together, usually using using the Boolean operator and for each keyword set. Hope that makes sense. Now, I need to come back to a whiteboard again. We're moving quickly through some of this, so I do want you to ask questions. No question is too dumb. If you have a question, it's very likely somebody else in the group has that same question. So I want to talk to you about two kinds of errors. And I want to use, systematic review. I want to use a fishing analogy because systematic review is kind of like going fishing, right? What are we doing with our keywords? We're kind of throwing a net out to the literature and we're scooping up lots of papers with our keywords. And then we're going to look in that net and see, well, did I like what I found? So imagine, for example, right, two kinds of errors. And I'm going to use fishing analogy because I just think it's easier. I'm fishing and we want to catch tuna. We throw out our net. What are the two kinds of things that can happen that we don't want? We're fishing for tuna, right? And we cast out our net. And in our net, we get some sea bass, right? So that's not something we want. So what are we gonna do? We have some options, right? We can either throw the sea bass back to sea, saying, well, we don't want you. We can throw it back. Or we can say, I didn't like what I caught this time. I'm gonna tweak my net to try to get more tuna in the net. This is called a type 1 error. And it's sometimes referred to as a false positive. Like my net caught something I didn't really want. And with that, you can see we have two options. We can recast our net and try to improve it. Or we can later on, option 2 is throw back to sea. Right? You have two approaches. There's a second type of error. Suppose we throw out our net and we actually catch some tuna. Maybe we caught the small tuna, we caught the big tuna, but we didn't catch the small tuna. Maybe there was a hole in the net and the tuna swam through. So we actually missed some. So there was some tuna out there that we didn't catch. So we actually missed, maybe we missed the little tuna, and we wanted them. This thing, if we cast our net and we didn't catch something that we wanted to catch, that's a type 2 error. Now, here we don't have any option here. We can't throw something back to sea that we didn't catch. Our only option here is we only have the first option. We have to recast our net. Right? So we have to do options. That's why at this stage in your search is really important, right? There's always going to be a balance. Imagine you cast a net with very little hold and you catch everything in the sea. You're catching sea bass, you're catching flounders, you're catching shrimp. You're going to have a ton of type 1 errors, but you caught everything in the sea. You're going to catch the little tuna too. But if you really try to optimize your net, as try to optimize it, you get rid of the sea bass and the shrimp, but you might start missing some tuna as well. So there's always this little bit of a tension between the type 1 and type 2 errors. You might bring down the type 1, but increase the type 2. And I'm going to give you some tools to test this. So you really want to make sure that in your search this is the harder thing. Or you can always go back later. I've got my fish here, and you can always throw out of the net, and you haven't missed anything. So it's really important to pay attention to these type 2 errors, and that is to say, like articles that should be in your search that your search didn't catch. That's a type 2 error. Those are the more dangerous ones. So I mean, and think about this. Often this type 1, type 2 is used in thinking about testing. Say, right, you could say somebody took a COVID test and the test said they were negative, but they weren't. That's bad. That could be a super spreader event. They were actually positive. They didn't know. They're now going to go spread COVID everywhere. Often this kind of error framework is used throughout the social sciences, medical sciences for thinking about detection. So I don't want to get too deep into that kind of analysis, but I want to help you figure out how to mitigate these. So with the type 1, right, like I said, you can go through in the next stage that we're going to cover next week, and you can throw them back. And you can do that as we simply screen and say, is this relevant? Nope, it's a sea bass, not relevant, out. Or you can start tweaking your words. For example, if I had used that term housing and poverty, I think, or health expenditures, I think those things would have given me a lot of false positives. I think those would have started returning a lot of articles that didn't really capture poverty. It might have been covering housing, but wasn't really capturing poverty in the way I thought about it. So that's why I didn't include that, because I was trying to mitigate type 1 errors. And you can see as I try to tweak my search, let me come back to PubMed and show you how I would try to deal with these type 1 errors. If I came back to PubMed, and again, while you want your advanced search, I can take my term and say, let me just things look like if I take this first term, and let me add this query here. But let me take out, I think maybe social conditions is just not really capturing poverty well. Let me take that out. And let me take out violence. I mean, I don't think violence is really capturing poverty that well. I don't think I need it. I think it's actually in favor of my results. And you see, I can get here 937,000, and this brought me to 889. I could build my search up again and see if I brought down the type 1 errors, reduce the overall number of my search without missing things that I really need. So this is kind of hard though. How do you know you haven't missed something you really needed? How do you, if there's a type 2 error? And this is where we've devised what I call a type 2 error test. And you're basically going to test the robustness of your search by going to, this is where Google Scholar. So this is when you come in here in Google Scholar and say, okay, I want to look at the 8 treatment outcomes. You don't want to use this on your main search because it's not replicable, but it's pretty good at finding things relevant. Here we go. So this is so I might take 5 papers that I can see are on the money here, and I'm going to test to make sure they're actually in my net. So here's a good poverty stigma is associated with suboptimal care and treatment outcomes among women living in the U.S. What I recommend you do is you take 5 of these on Google Scholar that you find are relevant, and you go back and test and make sure they're in your search. If they don't appear in your search, it means that something's wrong with your keywords. You have missed a key article, and that says there's a hole in the net. There's something wrong with your search that you need to update. You might need to expand how you capture poverty. So let's see here. Poverty, stigma, care. This should be in our search, right? Because it's got poverty, HIV, treatment outcomes, all in the title. So let's check. So this is by Leddy and Turan, and we have the paper here, and we can see that this team. So let's go back to our search. And this is what we're going to, I recommend you do this for 5 articles. So I'm just going to come back to the search. And let me see if, actually, a simple way to do this is advanced search. I'm going to add and author, and hopefully I'm getting the syntax right. Actually, I'm going to go back to advanced build and build this up. So author would be, let's add this, add to history. So I can just add this and add this with and. Let's see what we got. And there we go. There's the one article. So now I'm confident that it was in my search. My search was doing what it needed to do. We're going to come back, and this is how you do your type 2 test. You come here and you search, and you'll go through all these things. If you get 5 out of 5, you're feeling good. If you missed one, you need to look very closely and see. So maybe, oh, here, suppose this was a good word and it didn't have poverty. I use social marginalization. That's not a term that came up in my nearest neighbor match. Maybe it needs to be there. Other people hadn't done that before. I'm going to include it. and you want to make sure you've captured these articles. So you've minimized those type 2 errors. I hope that that makes sense. I don't know if you've ever done this before, but that's really the flow of what you need to do to minimize your type 1, type 2 errors going forward. What we're going to do in the next session going forward is I'm going to show you how to export from PubMed into your reference manager, EndNote or Zotero, and actually then start applying screening eligibility stages and applying your inclusion exclusion criteria. We're going to fill out a flow diagram called Prisma to keep track every step of the way of all the decisions you've made. But this first step, what I was covering today to you, was how to define your keywords using our nearest neighbor match, and what you need to do to understand type 1, type 2 errors, and specifically to test for type 2 errors. So I hope you're feeling good and understanding how can I start to balance those two using our Google Scholar search to test for type 2 errors and to adjust your keywords to reduce false positives, but still make sure that you are minimizing the amount of type 2 errors that you have. Okay, as we have covered a lot of ground here, I want to come back and take some really good questions that are coming up here in the group. Whoops, let me come out of here. And so some people are asking me questions here in the private chat, and guys, these are great questions, but these questions need to go into the main chat. So the main chat is over here, and they all need to be asked there so that everybody can see them. So I'll read some of them out as I go through. But let me pull up this question. This is a good question. Instead of removing search, why not use not in the search strategy? Is that applicable for items we state in the exclusion criteria? So you could use not, but I'd say 99% of the cases, you don't need to use it. You're better off if you've captured your term well. I mean, you could say not sea bass, but you're going to end up saying not for a lot of things. Not sea bass, not shrimp, not flounder, not turbot, not dolphin, not whale. I mean, there's a lot of not things to get out. So because the not things is potentially infinite, unless there's a very specific distinction you want to say, I really want poverty, and it has to be poverty and not deprivation for some reason. Maybe you're really splitting hairs on two related concepts that you really want to pull apart and differentiate. I don't like using the term not. And again, I think you're better off optimizing, operationalizing your keywords by throwing out your net, and then those things like if you need to throw some fish back to sea, you can do that in your inclusion exclusion stage coming up later and actually track those numbers. So again, I know a lot of people do use not, and they have good success with it. Just the approach that's had a lot of success for me personally and for our students has been to really get a really nice search and to try to keep it as simple and parsimonious as possible, just building up the keywords. So I only want you to use those exclusions if you have some specific analytical reason for doing so. So really good question. Hope that makes sense. Again, for example, you might use a not if you know, for example, oh, I want the treatment outcomes, all treatment outcomes, maybe in your term is I want all treatment outcomes except tuberculosis. And I still think it's easier at that stage. You've narrowed down to 912 articles, as we've seen here. I think you can go through and throw everything out that's in tuberculosis. It's just the problem with not is too, you can run the risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You can actually throw something out that might still be relevant. So, what if you say, okay, if we said not tuberculosis, but it covers actually tuberculosis and HIV treatment outcomes, you've thrown out something relevant. So again, not my favorite way to operationalize the search because I think it can lead to too many type 2 errors. I'm going to come back to the private chat. Some of you were you had a lot of questions. Let me come to Akansha S here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise. As you believe in open access, I was wondering, can we use arXiv as our database for systematic review? And the answer is no. The arXiv is a repository, but it's not a search engine in the same way, and it's not published papers. I recommend that you search published papers that are out there. So you may have a specific reason to not want to do that, and you just want to look at the papers that are not yet published, that's okay. Then you could potentially include it. But I recommend for the vast majority of you sticking to the inventories where papers have gone through peer review and are published. So you're dealing with rock solid evidence that you can stand on. Mm. Scott asks a good question. He says, on the type 2 error, how would you know if you missed a small tuna? Scott, let me know. I hope that has answered the question for you uh, on how you know you missed a small tuna using the Google Scholar test. I see you going on to say, out of 5 articles, could there be situation papers that are not on the 2 chosen databases, but are on Google Scholar and would be relevant? Yes. So that could potentially happen, especially happens if you have gray literature or others. And I'm going to show you how, in some exceptional cases, you want this to be a very small portion of your search. All right, you want about 90% of your papers coming from your main search databases. If you have some additional papers that you're missing in your net and you've searched and PubMed just doesn't have them, Web of Science just doesn't have them, you may want to add another major database that would have it. Or in the exceptional case, you can add those isolated papers from Google Scholar, but you want these to be few. Since they're not replicable, you're actually going to outline and detail them and itemize them one by one in your method section so you don't get accused of cherry picking. Really good question. So yeah, the first protocol might be to use third database to do that because again, the database will be replicable. And have a comment here in the group. It's good to use Google Scholar as complement searches to cover ground. Exactly. We're using Google here, especially to test for our type 2 errors. And if we detect them, then we're going to try to improve our net. We're going to try to improve our basic search by upgrading our keywords, or maybe by adding another database to make sure we get coverage. If all else fails, our last resort is to add a handful of papers coming in from Google Scholar. So we're already getting some questions about inclusion and exclusion. If we only want observational studies and exclude experimental, at which stage do I exclude? It's very hard to exclude studies by study type in your main search. You can, but there aren't really good filters or search terms for doing so. Most of this is going to come in your next step to actually apply and say, oh, I want certain kinds of studies. I want to do that in my next step in the screening stage that we're going to talk about next week. I want you to get the nuts and bolts of your search right, and then we'll go to the next step. And we're going to cover some ways that are pre-built into the databases like Web of Science and PubMed, say for filtering by RCTs. I'm actually going to show you these are not very accurate. People use them, but they have a lot of noise and a lot of variation. So I prefer not to do that. Exactly. So yeah, that's kind of a quality. Somebody saying normally exclusion on quality screening. Exactly. That's going to be the next stage in the flow. Remember, what we've done is we've defined your topic. You're now defining your keywords. Next, we're going to go through the screening and eligibility stages, applying inclusion, exclusion criteria. After next week, that's going to get you to your final analytical sample. So you guys are going to have a lot of work this week to get to this next stage, piloting your search, balancing those type 1, type 2 errors. Then we're going to go to the analysis. And only after we've done that, we're going to move to the write-up. Yeah, that's already good to think about these inclusion exclusion criteria at this stage. I want all of you guys who are following along with the challenge and who are up for it to make sure this week that you have already begun to pilot your search. And if you guys are getting a total of say 5,000 articles, 10,000 articles, I think it's too much. My rule of thumb is you want to be under 1,000 articles at this stage. If you have too many articles, we're just not going to see you for a long time. I think you can do better in minimizing your type 1 errors without making type 2 errors. When you start getting down to very small numbers, your type 2 errors can really start to creep up. So just kind of rule of thumb benchmark, I want you to be under 1,000 at this point in your search if you can. Again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but that usually tells me that there's some scope to get rid of some type 1 errors for most of the topics that you're searching. The vast majority of you will end up with a final number of articles in your sample between about 15 and 60. And that's kind of the broad direction that we're going to go. Okay, we got some time for additional questions. And Daniel, thanks for bringing up these points. Those are really good questions. Um, Milton, I also saw that you had your topic here. You said the capability in yours, the capability of K-12 teachers to prepare art students for post-secondary education. So again, Milton, I'd encourage you to really think about what the outcome is in that. So the capability is kind of a difficult outcome. There was another person in the group who wanted to look at resilience as an outcome, and that's not the easiest outcome to define. So you just need to make sure there's enough studies that have actually investigated, what makes K-12 teachers capable for arts. I suspect you're going to struggle to find 30 plus papers that have looked at that specifically as an outcome. But if you think about capability broadly, maybe you could think about the capability. You could look at leadership. That could be one. You could look at different competencies that maybe have been studied. Um, so I think you need to do a little bit more searching in the background to clarify the outcome. And I think in general, the outcome is one of the most challenging things. Courtney says super helpful, specifically mesh term and errors. Yeah. A lot of people like to use. There are now some automated search tools called Ryan or Covidence, and these can be great. But what they often do is they use automated searches and try to use artificial intelligence to kind of cut corners in the search. And look, the technology is coming a long way, but there's just no substitute for thinking and operationalizing this yourself. I've actually found my students have had faster results instead of trying to clean up the errors that the automated tools make of just doing a good old fashioned bread and butter search that uses these approaches to optimize the search and minimize the type 1 and type 2 errors. So glad that's really helpful to you. And you really want to know that these tools exist, especially as you get more advanced in your research. These tools are going to open up new functionality. It's going to help you to ask questions that other people can't, because you're going to be able to see things, patterns in the literature, and apply these mesh terms. Look for these subject area categories in ways that other people don't even know how to do. So let me take another good question that came here. What if we only have 200, 400 articles in first level search? That's perfect. You're right on the money. That's really nice. That's yeah. I mean, if I could say, Daniel, hey, I want you to find a perfect starting point for your search, that would be a really good number of articles to look at. And we have lots of ways in the where we're headed with inclusion and exclusion to make the numbers more manageable for you. So, and that can be, as somebody mentioned before, say putting an exclusion criteria, say I only want the highest quality studies. I have a researcher who's taking a very well and detailed study topic that has hundreds and hundreds of articles, and he's only going to look at the very high quality designs that can establish causality. And that's bringing the numbers right down. He only wants the highest quality of evidence available. So that's something you can do. I just want to make sure, again, this step, we're going to call it here because we're going to be right up on an hour, that to be ready for next week. All right, you should have your PICO, you should have that linking sentence. I want you to use our nearest neighbor match to operationalize each keyword. I want you to identify the appropriate databases that you need, at least 2, and build up those terms one by one and start your search. Then I want you to use our Google Scholar type 2 error test to make sure your net is robust. Once you know your net's robust, try to take out the type 1 errors without creating new type 2 errors. And that will help you get to really that sweet spot that you know your search is doing great. And then from there, we're going to move on. You're going to be ready for next week. Last question that we got here. Can I only consider first level search and no perform the snowball process? Absolutely. And by snowball process, sometimes what people will do in their searches is they get their initial set of articles and then they search the references of those articles to find additional articles. Um, that's an additional add-on, and I'm going to talk about that next week. In what you can do, we first need to get this main basic search before you can add on different components of the search. You're clarifying here, filter the articles in only one level. I'm not really sure. I understand what you're trying to say there. Filter in only one level. Maybe you could clarify that for me. Not really sure where you're going there. But yeah, there's some other things that you may have heard of before, other tools and techniques. Don't worry, we're going to be comprehensive and cover everything you need to know, start to finish, to publish your systematic review. As ever, I'm going to be in touch in the comments, and those of you on the replay, make sure, especially that you ask questions and comments, DM me directly, and I try to get back to you within the day. Just want to make sure that you follow along. I'm really proud of those of you who are taking on this challenge. This is it's not going to be easy, but I'm confident you can do it. Oh, here you're saying filter. Yeah, we're going to talk about filters. Avoid it exactly. And duration of the search. I like using the pre-built-in filters in most cases. We're going to talk about that next week for your inclusion and exclusion. I find it so much easier to just take out the articles that are not in English later on. It's very easy to do without relying on the manual filters of PubMed to do it, and it makes it easy for you to quantify how many articles were not in English, so you can detail that. We're going to come to that. So I really appreciate the enthusiasm. A lot of you guys are racing ahead, which is also fantastic. But before going too far ahead, I do recommend master these steps so that you follow along. No more, no less. Just make sure you're at this point so you don't waste time, lose energy. If you do want to race ahead, you can watch back in the guide section our last systematic review challenge. You can see where we're going to go. But I do recommend you stay with us. Again, pop in the comments how you're doing on your search, and that helps other people in the group also really to be a community of practice so that we can collectively troubleshoot some of your searches and help you in your search to minimize your type 1, type 2 errors. All right, guys, great to see you as ever. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I will be looking forward to our next session together. Bye for now.